Millionaire left his pregnant wife after the diagnosis, but she recovered and took it all. Millions of dollars can buy luxury cars, sprawling mansions, and the illusion of a perfect life. But deep within those glittering facades often lie secrets so profound they threaten to shatter everything. This is the story of a marriage born in promise and drowned in betrayal, of a pregnant wife cast aside by the one person sworn to protect her. When a devastating medical diagnosis sealed her fate, her wealthy husband made the cruelest choice. Yet from the rubble of heartbreak, a phoenix rose. She not only survived, she thrived. Her journey is a testament to resilience, a reminder that real power starts with the soul. Henry Coleman was the sort of man who wore ambition like a custom-tailored suit. At 32, he had already accumulated more money than his entire extended family had seen in their lifetimes. Born and raised in the suburbs of Sacramento, California, Henry had an affinity for risk-taking from an early age. He traded baseball cards in middle school with a calculated vigilance, always seeking the rare gem that others overlooked. By the time he entered high school, he had moved on to day trading small stocks with money borrowed from his supportive parents, convincing them his budding passion would blossom into a lucrative future. What truly set him apart, however, was his charisma. Henry possessed a magnetic energy that made people gravitate toward him. At social gatherings, he dominated the room without effort, weaving stories of his business conquests into epic tales that left his audience spellbound. His confidence was alluring even to those who claimed to see through it. Perhaps it was this confidence that eventually led him to Fiona. They met at a charity gala in downtown Sacramento, an event raising funds for cancer research. Fiona Townsend, then simply Fiona Townsend, not yet Fiona Coleman, was a volunteer there. She'd been folding pamphlets and placing them neatly on every table before the guests arrived. Henry, wearing an impeccably tailored navy blue suit, noticed her right away. Though she was just a volunteer that night, something about her warm smile and the earnest way she spoke about the fundraiser made an impression on him. Fiona came from a far more modest background. She grew up in a small home on the outskirts of the city, worked part-time jobs through college, and spent most of her time contributing to various volunteer causes. She had a genuine soul, the type who'd stay up all night comforting a grieving friend, or sacrifice her own comfort if it meant bringing a little bit of joy to someone else. It was this heart, so full of compassion, that ensnared Henry's interest the moment he watched her carefully position ribbons and balloons, ensuring every table looked perfectly presentable. He introduced himself as a benefactor for the event. A conversation sparked first about the charity, then about life. Fiona felt an immediate sense of caution, recognizing Henry's well-practiced charm, but he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions on philanthropic endeavors. As the gala continued, he came back to talk to her at every opportunity. By the end of the night, he'd asked her to join him for coffee, promising he only wanted to continue their fascinating discussion. Fiona hesitated, but something in his eyes, a hint of sincerity, amid all that polished bravado, convinced her to say yes. Coffee became dinner, and dinner became another date. Soon, Fiona found herself stepping into Henry's world of lavish meals, exclusive clubs, and influential connections. She wasn't entirely comfortable there. Her middle-class upbringing felt starkly at odds with Henry's high-rolling lifestyle, but she appreciated how he seemed to treasure her. The philanthropic side of Henry's life also impressed her. He donated significant sums to various charities, including the Cancer Research Foundation, where they'd met. While it was true that Henry's generosity occasionally doubled as a business strategy, helping him network with the right people, Fiona observed moments of genuine empathy in him. Moments that gave her hope this outwardly ambitious mogul possessed a softer center. When Henry proposed 6 months later, it felt quick, Yet she couldn't deny the whirlwind romance they'd shared. He dropped to one knee at a local botanical garden, a place Fiona adored for its serenity. She accepted. In that instant, her life seemed like an improbable fairy tale. She was marrying a man who had the world at his fingertips, and he was willing to share that world with her. For her parents, who lived on the lower end of the socio-economic ladder, it was a dream come true to see their daughter secure such a brilliant, successful partner. Within a year, they were wed at a lavish ceremony in Napa Valley, attended by industry titans and politicians. Henry often rubbed shoulders with. People praised the union as a match of brains and beauty, and every camera seemed drawn to Henry's triumphant smile. More intimate snapshots, however, showed Fiona's quiet warmth and the unassuming joy that made her so unique. Though Henry soared in the professional sphere, closing deals and multiplying his fortune, Fiona remained grounded. She spent her time volunteering and, when she wasn't at a charity event, she accompanied Henry on business trips. She helped him connect with communities and philanthropic projects, balancing out what sometimes felt like an obsession with profit. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it worked, thanks largely to Fiona's unwavering patience and Henry's willingness, at least initially, to compromise. One crisp January morning, Fiona woke up feeling a wave of nausea that caught her off guard. Thinking it might be just a stomach bug, she tried to brush it off. However, as the days passed, she found herself increasingly fatigued, with an unusually heightened sense of smell. The faint aroma of coffee would suddenly overwhelm her, churning her stomach. Suspecting something more, she purchased a home pregnancy test from a discreet pharmacy across town. While she and Henry had talked about having children someday, Fiona wasn't certain if this was the right time. She felt a flutter of excitement, but also worry about Henry's reaction. He was in the middle of a groundbreaking venture, something about a tech platform that would revolutionize financial analysis and working 14-hour days to ensure its success. The moment Fiona saw the positive lines, her heart pounded with a mix of joy and fear. She recalled how Henry sometimes spoke about fatherhood in hypothetical terms, always couched in disclaimers like "once everything settles down" or "when I've reached my next financial goal." Regardless, Fiona felt a surge of warmth bloom inside her. She was going to be a mother, an unplanned but, to her, welcome surprise. That evening, she decided to create the perfect atmosphere to share the news. She prepared Henry's favorite meal, roasted salmon in lemon butter sauce, and lit candles in their elegant dining room. She even dressed in a simple but elegant gown she knew he admired. Her plan was to reveal the pregnancy test result after dessert. However, Henry arrived home late, exhausted and visibly irritated. He dropped his briefcase on the marble floor with a thud, heading straight for a glass of whiskey at the bar. Though he forced a smile when he saw her preparations, the tension in his posture was undeniable. "I'm sorry," he muttered, loosening his tie. Investor meeting ran over, and then traffic was a nightmare. Undeterred, Fiona asked him to join her at the dining table. She tried to keep the meal warm in the oven, but some dishes had grown cold. Henry tried to look appreciative, but his gaze kept drifting to his phone. Sensing his distraction, Fiona decided to expedite her plan. She handed him a small velvet pouch after they finished eating. "Open it," she whispered, heart pounding. Henry pulled out the home pregnancy test, eyes widening in realization. "Are you serious?" he asked, voice tight. She nodded, tears of joy gathering in her eyes. "Yes, Henry, we're going to have a baby." For a flicker of a moment, she saw wonder in his expression, but as quickly as it came, it vanished, replaced by apprehension, almost dread. "That's wow," he said, forcing a half-hearted smile. "That's big news. It's just not the best timing." The words stung Fiona, though she tried not to let it show. "I know it's sudden," she conceded, but we talked about this someday. Maybe this is just earlier than expected. Henry gulped his whiskey. I need some time to process this, Fiona. My plate is already overflowing with work. That night he was distant. Fiona lay awake in bed, one hand over her stomach, wondering if Henry would truly come around. By the next morning he was gone before she woke, leaving a terse note, had an early flight to New York. We'll talk when I get back. Fiona swallowed her disappointment and tried to keep the spark of joy alive. Henry was ambitious, yes, but she hoped he would embrace fatherhood once he grasped the gravity of bringing new life into the world. Little did she know how deeply his fears and drive would begin to erode the foundation of their marriage. Henry's flight to New York was filled with conflicting thoughts and mounting pressures. He was on the verge of sealing a deal with an investment firm that could catapult his company into a new stratosphere of wealth. Yet the news that Fiona was pregnant had thrown him into emotional chaos. Once in Manhattan, he plunged into meetings. The city's towering skyscrapers and frenetic pace mirrored his internal state. During brief moments between negotiations, his mind wandered to thoughts of fatherhood images of cradling an infant, rearranging his schedule for pediatric appointments. The visions both excited and terrified him. Was he ready for this? Back in Sacramento, Fiona scheduled a doctor's appointment with Dr. Samantha Lee, the OB-GYN at Cedars-Sinai, whom she and Henry had donated to in previous philanthropic drives. Fiona arrived early, a bundle of nerves. After some tests and an ultrasound, Dr. Lee confirmed she was around 8 weeks along. The doctor's gentle reassurance drew tears of relief from Fiona's eyes. But the appointment came with a twist. Dr. Lee noted some irregularities in Fiona's liver enzymes, nothing critical yet, but worth monitoring. Pregnancy can put extra stress on the body, Dr. Lee explained. We'll run more tests to rule out any underlying condition. Fiona tried not to panic. She told herself it was likely just normal pregnancy-related changes. Still, a small knot of anxiety lodged in her chest. A week passed before Henry returned from New York, triumphant in his negotiations. He breezed through the door, briefcase in hand, his grin fading when he saw Fiona's apprehensive expression. She explained the medical findings. Dr. Lee is concerned I might have an autoimmune issue. I need more tests, Henry. He frowned, sinking into the sofa. Autoimmune issues, what does that mean? It could complicate the pregnancy, she replied, voice trembling. Doctor, Lee wants me to see a specialist. Henry's shoulders tensed. Look, whatever you need, we'll do it. But are we sure now's the best time for this? I mean, if it's dangerous. Fiona's heart clenched at the implication he might be hinting at. She hadn't even considered terminating the pregnancy. This baby is part of us, she managed, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. I'm not giving up, he sighed, nodding. Right. Fine, I just need to think. That night, Henry tossed and turned, consumed by guilt and fear. Fiona felt more alone than ever, clinging to the hope that he'd come around. But as the weeks passed, his business demands only intensified, and his emotional distance grew. Fiona was left to navigate a precarious health challenge with minimal support from the one person whose presence she needed most. Fiona's appointment with the specialist doctor, Christopher Brown, marked the start of a new reality. Dr. Brown was a respected maternal fetal medicine expert in his early 50s. Tall and calm, he carried a reputation for guiding high-risk pregnancies with compassionate expertise. He reviewed Fiona's records, asked detailed questions, and recommended a series of tests. It appears your immune system might be producing certain antibodies that could affect your organs and the baby's development, he said gently. We'll monitor closely, and there are medications that can help, but it's crucial you follow up often. His words landed with sobering weight. Fiona tried to quell her mounting anxiety. What about stress, she asked, Recalling Dr. Lee's warning, Dr. Brown offered a sad smile. Stress can exacerbate autoimmune disorders. Try to keep calm, rest, and get emotional support. Fiona thought of Henry's incessant absences, the tension in their once happy home. She forced a nod, promising to do her best. In the following weeks, she submerged herself in medical appointments and quiet self-care. She took gentle walks, practiced prenatal yoga, and prepared healthy meals that might bolster her immune system. Friends from her volunteer circles rallied around, providing rides to the hospital whenever Henry was unavailable. Meanwhile, Henry found himself more immersed in his business empire than ever before. The success of his latest deal led to more partnerships, each demanding a piece of him. Between flights and meetings, his moments at home were fleeting, and even then, he seemed preoccupied. One night, Fiona laid out her latest ultrasound images on the kitchen table, hoping to spark some fatherly excitement. Henry barely glanced at them before muttering something about an urgent email. As her pregnancy advanced, Fiona sensed a gaping chasm opening between them. Henry's polite responses and occasional apologies didn't soften the feeling of abandonment she felt, especially as her health remained in delicate balance. One weekend, he returned from a trip to Dallas, particularly agitated, ranting about investor demands. Fiona tried to comfort him, but he shrugged her off with a dismissive, "I just need some space." That brief exchange rattled Fiona. She realized Henry was slipping away, possibly seeking an escape from the emotionally fraught atmosphere at home. The once glamorous life they shared now seemed more like a performance, with Fiona cast in the role of a lonely spectator and Henry the ever-distant star. Fiona woke one morning to find Henry already gone. This was not unusual, but it still stung. His typical note was replaced by a curt text called Redwood Financial about some documents. "They'll need your signature." Confused, she poured herself a cup of herbal tea and tried to distract herself from the wave of nausea returning with the pregnancy's progress. Later that afternoon, a call came in from Redwood Financial. A polite woman named Michelle explained that Henry had set up a trust arrangement. Fiona was to sign several legal documents that would finalize the transfer of certain assets. Fiona, taken aback, asked that the documents be emailed so she could review them. She opened the file on her laptop, only to be confronted by reams of dense legal language, references to an irrevocable trust, clauses limiting beneficiary rights, and fine print disclaimers. She left a message for Henry, asking for clarity, but received only a generic text in reply, "Busy. Will explain later." Alarmed, Fiona reached out to an old college friend, Mark Johnson, now an attorney. After scanning the documents, Mark's tone darkened. "It looks like Henry is compartmentalizing significant assets into a trust you won't have ready access to. If something goes wrong like a divorce, you could be cut off from these funds." Fiona felt a sharp pang of betrayal, tears filling her eyes. Why would he do that now? Mark cleared his throat gently. "Could be standard estate planning, could also be more. You need to be cautious." That evening, Fiona confronted Henry in their living room, documents in hand. "I got a call from Redwood Financial. What's this about a trust that excludes me?" Henry, exhausted from back-to-back meetings, bristled at the accusation. "It's just business, Fiona," he said, face tight. "I have investors. I need to protect certain assets." "Protect from whom?" Fiona asked, her voice trembling. "From me?" He looked away. "It's not personal. My legal team advised me to set this up to shield funds. It's best for the company." "It's best for you," Fiona fired back. "I'm your wife, Henry. I'm pregnant and sick. You didn't even talk to me before doing this?" He grimaced, an undercurrent of guilt slipping through his irritation. "I'm sorry. Things are complicated. Let's not blow this out of proportion." But it was too late. The trust documents stood as damning evidence of Henry's commitment to his empire above all else. Fiona walked away, clutching the pages, her mind swirling with a dread she could no longer ignore. Over the following weeks, Fiona threw herself into managing her health. Dr. Brown's regimen of medications and frequent checkups began stabilizing some of her concerning symptoms. She also attempted to keep her stress under control, though the situation with Henry weighed heavily on her heart. She sought solace in the small victories of pregnancy, the fluttery sensation of the baby kicking, the improvement in her lab results, the unwavering support from friends. Angela White, in particular, proved a steadfast ally, picking Fiona up for doctor's appointments whenever Henry was unavailable, an increasingly common occurrence. Henry, meanwhile, rented a sleek penthouse apartment downtown, initially framing it as a temporary crash pad for overnight business stays. But days turned into a week, and he barely returned to their home. Their once shared mansion, filled with polished floors and designer furniture, became a silent stage on which Fiona battled her anxieties alone. The loneliness became intolerable one afternoon when she received a call from Redwood Financial again. They demanded her signature on additional documents related to shifting assets. This time, Fiona refused and told them she wanted her own lawyer's review first. She sensed the momentum of Henry's strategy. He was insulating himself financially, apparently preparing for a worst-case scenario. Her suspicions confirmed, Fiona dialed Mark Johnson. "I won't sign anything," she said, her voice quivering. "I want to protect myself and my child. Henry's barely around. I'm scared he's leaving me for good." Mark listened patiently, advising her to document everything and ensure she didn't lose her rightful share of assets. Fiona appreciated his calm professionalism, but the emotional toll pressed heavily on her. She lay awake at night, one hand on her growing belly, trying to quell the fear of raising a child alone while also battling health complications. One day, after yet another lonely prenatal class, she found Henry waiting at the house. He'd come to collect more of his belongings, or so he said. She confronted him in the foyer, fighting tears. "Henry, can we please talk?" she pleaded. "Are you moving out for good?" He avoided her gaze, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm not abandoning you, Fiona. I just need space. My work, my stress. I can't focus with all this, she repeated, heart twisting. "You mean me, my illness, our child?" he exhaled, looking momentarily pained. "That's not fair. You know it's more complicated than that." Fiona pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling the baby move as if in protest. "I'm fighting to keep myself and our baby healthy, Henry. But you're busy insulating yourself from us financially. That's the reality." Henry said nothing, merely gathered his suitcases and left. The shutting of the front door resonated through the cavernous hall, echoing the finality of his departure. Fiona sank onto a nearby chair, tears slipping down her cheeks as the baby shifted inside her, a poignant reminder she was no longer just fighting for herself. Henry's new penthouse offered a panoramic view of Sacramento, an ambitious businessman's dream. But no matter how impressive the skyline, guilt gnawed at him. He told himself he was doing this for everyone's benefit. Fiona needed a calm environment, he reasoned. Yet a part of him knew the truth. He was running from emotional responsibility. Work devoured his days. His tech platform was on the verge of a major launch, and every detail demanded his attention. He told himself he'd make it up to Fiona once the chaos subsided, once he secured the biggest success of his career. Yet nights in the penthouse felt hollow. He slept fitfully, haunted by the memory of Fiona's tear-streaked face. Back at the mansion, Fiona found her days long and exhausting. Her autoimmune condition flared unpredictably, causing bouts of pain and nausea. She relied heavily on Dr. Brown's treatments and Angela's steadfast kindness. Though physically drained, her spirit remained unexpectedly resilient. Late one evening, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Answering cautiously, she heard a warm, familiar voice. "Fiona? It's Angela. I'm at the hospital. You need to get down here." Alarm coursed through her. "Hospital? What's wrong?" "It's Henry," Angela said quietly. "He collapsed at a meeting. They think it's sheer exhaustion or stress, but I figured you should know." Despite everything, Fiona's heart lurched with concern. She threw on a jacket and rushed to the hospital. Angela met her in the waiting area, her face drawn with worry. "Where is he?" Fiona asked, breathless. Angela pointed down the hall. "He's stable now, but they're doing tests. They said it's stress-related. He's been pushing himself too hard." Fiona felt an odd mixture of sympathy and frustration. She approached Henry's room cautiously. He lay in the hospital bed, eyes closed, and the fourth drip ran into his arm, and his phone, ever present, rested on the bedside table. When he sensed her presence, his eyes flickered open, and a wave of embarrassment crossed his features. "What are you doing here?" he asked softly, clearing his throat. She swallowed. "Angela called me. I came because Henry, you're still my husband." He laughed bitterly. "Some husband I've been." They stared at each other in tense silence. Eventually, Henry looked away. "Doctor says I've got dangerously high blood pressure." Ironic, isn't it? I'm the one always preaching self-control, and now I can't even control my own stress. Fiona edged closer to the bed, arms folded protectively over her belly. "This can't keep going on. We're destroying ourselves, Henry." He nodded weakly, pain etched into the lines on his face. "I know." But even in that moment of vulnerability, Fiona sensed a wall between them. He was still that driven businessman, clinging to the remnants of control. She could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, as though he was already figuring out how to spin this setback into a win. When the doctor allowed Henry to be discharged, Fiona offered him a ride home. He declined, insisting he had a car service waiting. She watched him leave the hospital lobby, shoulders slumped. Sadness washed over her. Their marriage felt like a frayed tapestry, threads unraveling from all sides. As she made her way back to her car, she pressed a hand to her abdomen. The baby kicked, and she closed her eyes, whispering a silent vow. "No matter what happens with Henry, I'll protect you." For the first time, she acknowledged the possibility that she might have to raise her child alone. The next few weeks brought a series of jolts to Fiona's already delicate state. Her autoimmune symptoms intensified, leading to unpredictable bouts of fever and fatigue. Dr. Brown tweaked her medication, cautioning her yet again about the dangers of stress. One rainy afternoon, Fiona sat in her living room, flipping through medical bills and insurance forms. She hated feeling powerless, yet that was the exact state she found herself in, dependent on Henry's money, Henry's decisions, Henry's fleeting moments of concern. Just as she felt her resolve slipping, the doorbell rang. It was Mark Johnson, his expression guarded. He held a folder under his arm. "Fiona, I've been looking deeper into Henry's financial moves. You need to see this." She ushered him inside, heart pounding. They sat in the living room as Mark explained what he'd discovered. Henry had been transferring large sums of money into offshore accounts for the past few months. The trust arrangement was only part of a larger plan to insulate his assets. "He's moving his money out of reach," Mark said gently. "If he decides to walk away, you could be left with far less than you think." Fiona's eyes brimmed with tears of betrayal. She gazed around the lavish mansion, now revealed as a fragile facade. "So I'm basically facing the prospect of him abandoning me financially and emotionally while I'm pregnant and dealing with a serious health condition." Mark placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I won't let that happen. We can file certain claims or even a legal separation to protect you and the baby. But you need to decide how far you want to go." Fiona stared at the folder in her lap, feeling a swell of anger. This was her life, a life she had built with Henry, under the assumption that love and partnership meant support, not abandonment. She clenched her jaw. Do whatever it takes to secure what my child and I need. I won't let him hang us out to dry. Mark nodded, rising to leave. I'll prepare the paperwork. Call me when you're ready. After he left, Fiona sank into the couch, heart throbbing with a mingled sense of loss and determination. Her phone buzzed. It was Henry, texting to say he'd be out of town for business again. She almost laughed at the dark irony. He'd left her to fend for herself, all the while siphoning off the wealth he claimed was theirs. She curled a hand around her belly, feeling the baby move. We'll be okay, she whispered, voice trembling. I'll fight for you with everything I have. That night, Angela stopped by with groceries and a hug, just as the tears began to overwhelm Fiona. They sat in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound between them for a while. I can't believe he's doing this, Fiona said shakily. How did we get here? Angela squeezed her hand. Sometimes people reveal who they truly are under pressure. You need to focus on getting through your pregnancy and protecting your future. Henry's made his choices, Fiona nodded, steeling herself. She might have once been the sweet volunteer with a heart full of trust, but life had forced her to adapt. She wasn't just a victim, she was a mother to be with a responsibility to survive, even if it meant going to war with the man she once loved more than life itself. As Henry's offshore dealings deepened, fate delivered a curveball that rattled his empire. The ambitious tech platform he'd been developing faltered during its beta launch. Investors grew skittish. Stock valuations seesawed. Henry spent sleepless nights firefighting PR disasters while scrambling to patch the platform's technical flaws. The mounting stress took a visible toll. Dark circles ringed Henry's eyes, and his shoulders sagged beneath the weight of looming deadlines and potential lawsuits. He avoided Fiona entirely, convinced his presence would only heighten both their anxieties. Instead, he poured every ounce of energy into salvaging his company's crown jewel. Fiona, however, had her own crisis to face. One afternoon, she collapsed at home, seized by sharp abdominal pains and dizziness. Angela rushed over, finding Fiona pale and barely conscious. An ambulance sped Fiona to the hospital, where Dr. Brown discovered her blood pressure had skyrocketed dangerously. Henry, alerted by a frantic text from Angela, appeared at the hospital a few hours later, visibly shaken. He found Fiona in a private room, hooked to the fourth drips and monitors. She looked fragile, her once lively eyes dulled by pain. "I'm sorry," he whispered, approaching her bed. "I came as soon as I could." Fiona managed a faint nod, though she couldn't muster much energy to speak. Angela stood by her side, arms crossed, her glare conveying a silent admonishment to Henry. Dr. Brown arrived moments later, explaining that while they'd stabilized Fiona for now, her condition remained precarious. Stress, he emphasized again, was a significant threat to her and the baby. Henry sank into a chair, staring at the medical equipment. Guilt gnawed at him. As he looked at Fiona's wan complexion, he realized how close he was to losing everything that truly mattered. The ambition, the deals, the offshore accounts, none of it felt meaningful if it meant endangering the life of his wife and unborn child. He stayed at her bedside that night, phone switched off for the first time in ages. The hospital's fluorescent lights reflected off the antiseptic floors, casting sterile shadows across Fiona's face. She dozed in fitful spurts, occasionally waking to glance at Henry before drifting off again. By morning, Dr. Brown announced that Fiona was stable but recommended a longer hospital stay. Henry stepped into the corridor to take a call from his coup, who delivered grim news about potential investor lawsuits. For once, Henry couldn't muster any reaction. The only lawsuit that mattered was the one he waged against fate. desperately trying to keep Fiona and their baby alive. When he returned to Fiona's room, she gave him a weak, sad smile. "Go," she whispered. "Handle your crisis." He shook his head. "No, I'm staying. I can't keep running." But as the day wore on, his phone buzzed non-stop with urgent messages. Fiona saw him pacing in the hallway, torn between two worlds. In the end, she closed her eyes, letting the steady beep of the heart monitor lull her into a restless sleep. She couldn't force Henry to be the husband she needed. He had to choose that path himself. A few days later, Fiona was discharged from the hospital with strict orders for bed rest and minimal stress. Henry pleaded with her to come to his penthouse, arguing it was closer to the hospital and that he could arrange private nursing care there. Exhausted and eager for peace, she agreed. The penthouse was pristine and modern, a testament to Henry's taste for sleek lines and cutting-edge technology. A private nurse named Lily Smith greeted Fiona warmly, helping her to a spacious guest bedroom. Despite the luxurious surroundings, the atmosphere felt more clinical than cozy. Henry attempted to be more present. He rescheduled meetings to work from home, frequently checking in on Fiona's vitals. But the tension between them remained. Their once intimate conversations had turned polite and perfunctory. Fiona felt like a guest in Henry's domain rather than a partner in his life. One night, restless on the plush penthouse couch, Fiona heard Henry on a phone call in the adjacent room. She caught snippets of phrases like offshore assets and trust limitations. Her stomach twisted. Even now, amidst her fragile state, Henry continued to orchestrate his financial safety net. But fate wouldn't wait for them to figure things out. Early the next morning, Fiona jolted awake with excruciating abdominal pains. She gasped, struggling to breathe. Lily rushed in, checking Fiona's blood pressure. It was dangerously high again. An ambulance was summoned. Henry stumbled out of his room, disoriented, and followed in a daze as they whisked Fiona to the hospital. In the frantic blur that followed, Dr. Brown delivered grim news. The baby was showing signs of distress, and Fiona's body was nearing a breaking point. They had little choice but to perform an emergency C-section to save both mother and child. Henry stood outside the operating room, numb with panic. Memories of lavish galas and triumphant boardroom deals flashed through his mind, now rendered meaningless compared to the life or death stakes playing out behind those double doors. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Brown emerged. "You have a daughter," he said, offering a reassuring nod. "She's premature but stable. We'll keep her in the NICU for close observation. Fiona's lost a lot of blood, but we've stabilized her as well. She's in recovery." Relief collided with guilt in Henry's chest, tears burning his eyes. A father. He was a father now, yet he couldn't quell the dread that his own choices had contributed to this harrowing ordeal. When he was finally allowed to see Fiona, she lay pale and exhausted, a tangle of tubes and monitors surrounding her bed. "Henry," she rasped, her eyes fluttering open. "The baby, is she okay?" He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "She's in the NICU, but Dr. Brown says she'll be fine." Tears formed in Fiona's eyes, and he gently took her hand, squeezing it. In that moment, he realized how close he'd come to losing them both. No empire, no offshore account, no ambition could ever replace the miracle fighting for life in the NICU, or the woman lying in this hospital bed. He stayed by Fiona's side, phone off, as the hours slid into night. At some point, exhaustion claimed her, and he sat watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. A man with wealth beyond most imaginations, he had never felt more vulnerable. But in that vulnerability lay the beginning of what could be genuine change if he had the courage to follow through. In the weeks after Grace's dramatic birth, Fiona remained in the hospital to recover, while their newborn daughter fought to gain strength in the NICU. Henry spent his days shuttling between the two, splitting his time between Grace's incubator and Fiona's recovery room. The hospital became their temporary home, stripping away any veneer of high society and luxury. Money meant little in the face of medical uncertainties. Henry found himself enthralled by Grace's delicate features each time he peeked into her incubator. She was tiny, hooked to monitors and tubes, but each day brought small improvements, an ounce gained, a slight increase in stable breathing. He asked endless questions of the NICU nurses, determined to understand every aspect of her care. To his own surprise, the thrill of fatherhood overshadowed his once consuming hunger for business conquests. Fiona's healing process was slow but steady. Physically drained and emotionally exhausted, she spent hours asleep, awakened periodically by doctors checking vitals. Whenever she was lucid, Henry stayed close, updating her on Grace's progress. Occasionally, she'd see a tenderness in his eyes that reminded her of the man she first fell in love with. Still, the scars of betrayal lay fresh. She couldn't simply forget how he'd abandoned her in the darkest months of her pregnancy. Angela and Mark visited regularly, bringing care packages and unwavering moral support. Mark gently reminded Fiona to keep certain legal protections in mind, though he respected her need to focus on recovering rather than diving into another battle with Henry. In unguarded moments, Fiona wondered if Henry's shift in behavior was genuine or simply an emotional reflex to the crisis they'd endured. After nearly a month, Grace improved enough to be discharged, though she required close outpatient monitoring. Fiona, also stabilized, left the hospital around the same time. Henry arranged for them to stay at the penthouse, citing easy access to top-tier medical facilities. He even hired a private pediatric nurse to assist with Grace's specialized care. Those early days at home were chaotic and magical in equal measure. Grace cried at all hours, but the moments of holding her close, rocking her, feeling her tiny fingers curl around theirs, melted Fiona's heart. For the first time, Henry seemed fully present, cooking simple meals, running errands, and waking in the middle of the night to soothe Grace when she fussed. Yet, for all his efforts, Fiona struggled to let her guard down. She wasn't sure how to reconcile the attentive father Henry was becoming with the calculating businessman who had siphoned assets offshore. One evening, as she rocked Grace to sleep, Henry approached quietly. "I've missed so much," he whispered, gazing at Grace with awe. "I don't want to miss another moment of her life." Fiona studied his face, recalling the whirlwind of betrayal that had brought them to this juncture. "Henry, I want to believe you, but trust doesn't just snap back." He nodded, looking remorseful. "I understand. All I can do is try every day to show you I've changed." She turned her gaze to Grace, sleeping in her arms. The tiny heartbeat that pulsed in that fragile body was a testament to survival against impossible odds. She realized that she, too, carried a capacity for resilience she'd never known before. Whether or not Henry truly changed, she would always be able to stand on her own. For now, they existed in a cautious dance, each uncertain but hopeful that the near tragedy of Grace's birth might open a path to genuine reconciliation. In the months that followed, Henry strove to prove his commitment to both Fiona and Grace. He scaled back his office hours, delegated more tasks, and eased off the globe-trotting lifestyle. His focus pivoted from growth at all costs to ensuring the family's well-being. He even began attending therapy, acknowledging that his issues with control and fear of vulnerability had fueled many of his previous decisions. Fiona appreciated the shift, yet remained wary. She spent her days bonding with Grace and managing her own health, which, thanks to Dr. Brown's regimen, was slowly stabilizing. Each time Henry mentioned business deals or offshore accounts, anxiety fluttered through her. She wasn't naive about how quickly priorities could shift once daily pressures resumed. One evening, Henry surprised Fiona by inviting her to a small dinner at the penthouse. Dressed casually for the first time in ages, he prepared a modest pasta dish. Though it was slightly overcooked, Fiona was touched by the genuine effort. Over candlelight, he reached across the table. "I've terminated the offshore transfers," he said, his voice earnest, "and I dissolved that trust. Everything I was doing to protect my assets, I've undone it. Mark can verify. I want to make things right." Fiona's fork paused midway to her mouth. The revelation left her momentarily stunned. "You did?" He nodded, eyes reflecting sincerity. "I've seen what really matters. No more secrets, Fiona." Her chest constricted with a mixture of hope and caution. "It'll take me time to fully believe it," she admitted. He bowed his head. "I know. I'll wait as long as it takes." Still, life rarely grants smooth sailing. A few days later, a summons arrived at the penthouse from an investor who felt misled by Henry's earlier tech platform fiasco. They were suing for damages, claiming financial losses tied to Henry's alleged overpromises. The news rattled the household. Fiona, already anxious, worried how another crisis might pull Henry away. "This could drag on for years," he muttered, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. "I can't let it ruin everything we've built." Fiona felt a stab of fear. She recalled the Henry who would shut her out at the first sign of business trouble. Yet the new Henry surprised her. Rather than diving headlong into battle, he considered settling. "I hate paying them off," he admitted, "but it might be the best way to avoid a prolonged fight." In the end, Henry chose the settlement route, swallowing his pride for the sake of familial stability. The payout was significant, but it stemmed the tide of legal scrutiny. When all was finalized, Henry collapsed onto the living room sofa, emotionally spent. Fiona sat beside him, resting a hand on his. "Thank you," she said softly, "for putting us first." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting genuine regret and relief. "After almost losing you and Grace, I realized I can't measure my life by net worth alone." Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder. She remembered lying alone in a cold hospital bed, thinking Henry had abandoned her forever. The memory still hurt, but perhaps they had reached an inflection point. If his actions continued matching his words, maybe their family had a shot at real unity. Time brought steady healing to both Grace and Fiona. By the time Grace was 6 months old, she was hitting baby milestones, rolling over, babbling, reaching for toys. Fiona's autoimmune condition stabilized under Dr. Brown's vigilant eye, and her energy levels improved enough that she began revisiting some philanthropic ideas. The near-death ordeal had awakened a desire in Fiona to champion healthcare causes. She wanted to help other women facing high-risk pregnancies. Henry, seeing her passion rekindled, encouraged it wholeheartedly. Meanwhile, he wrestled with his own professional crossroads. After nearly losing everything, the unrelenting drive that once fueled him had dimmed. He quietly explored selling parts of his business, no longer enthralled by endless expansions. One late evening, after coaxing Grace back to sleep, Fiona discovered Henry in his home office, sifting through financial statements. Her chest tightened, recalling past deceptions. But this time Henry looked up with a weary smile. "I'm thinking of selling one of my subsidiaries," he admitted. "There's a good offer on the table, and I don't need to own everything. It might be time to focus on what really matters." Fiona stepped closer, heart pounding with cautious optimism. "Like what?" He shrugged, gesturing around the penthouse that had once symbolized his ambition. "You, Grace, a balanced life. Maybe using some of this fortune for genuine good. I don't have to be that cutthroat mogul anymore." Fiona studied him, seeing sincerity in his eyes. In that moment, she recalled the day she first saw him at a charity gala, drawn by his charm but hopeful about his philanthropic side. Perhaps this was the Henry she'd sensed all along, the one overshadowed by greed and fear. Weeks passed, and Henry finalized the sale of his subsidiary for a substantial sum. True to his word, he donated a portion to the children's hospital that had helped save Grace's life. Fiona stood beside him during the ceremonial check presentation, pride glowing in her chest. With looming business pressures eased, Henry immersed himself in fatherhood. He learned how to calm Grace's colic, how to make her giggle with silly faces, how to read her a bedtime story in soothing tones. Fiona, in turn, invested her rekindled energy into organizing a charity gala aimed at supporting mothers with complicated pregnancies, a cause close to her heart. Their relationship wasn't magically perfect. Trust once broken doesn't mend overnight. Yet every day, Henry and Fiona took small steps toward understanding and forgiving each other. They learned to communicate better, sometimes with the help of a marriage counselor. And with each shared laugh over Grace's antics, they inched closer to rekindling the love that once felt lost. Nearly a year after Grace's precarious birth, Fiona stood on a small stage in a grand ballroom for the survivors' charity gala. Lights glimmered off high ceilings, illuminating round tables set for donors and supporters. This event was deeply personal, embodying Fiona's journey from desperate hospital nights to triumphant new beginnings. Backstage, Henry cradled Grace, who gurgled happily in her ruffled dress. He watched Fiona approach the podium, remembering the timid volunteer he'd first encountered. Now she radiated quiet confidence, her story poised to inspire others. "Good evening," Fiona began, voice resonant in the hushed ballroom. "I stand here not just as a survivor, but as a mother who almost lost her life, bringing a child into this world. Tonight's gala is a celebration of resilience of every woman who has ever been told her pregnancy was too risky, her body too weak." Polite applause swelled, and Fiona continued, describing how the funds would benefit research and supportive programs for women facing high-risk pregnancies. Each word was infused with the authenticity of lived experience, drawing tears and admiration from the crowd. Henry, holding Grace, felt an unaccustomed swell of awe. The woman he'd hurt, the woman he'd nearly lost, stood poised and unbroken, channeling her pain into a cause that would help countless others. For the first time, he fully understood the depth of her strength and just how fortunate he was to be by her side. When the final auction items sold, the event organizer announced a record-breaking total. The crowd erupted in cheers. Some hurried to congratulate Fiona, while others praised Henry for matching donations. Cameras flashed, capturing their family in a moment of triumph. Yet, amid the applause, Henry had one more surprise. With Grace settled comfortably in his arms, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Fiona's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring, a symbol of renewal rather than old promises. "Fiona," Henry said, his voice trembling slightly, "I know I broke your trust in ways. Words alone can't repair, but I've spent every day of this past year trying to become a man worthy of you and Grace. Will you marry me again?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. The memory of hospital rooms, legal threats, and heartbreak still lingered, but so did the warmth of Henry's steady presence these past months. She glanced at Grace, who stared up at them with innocent wonder, and then back at Henry. "Yes," she whispered, voice quavering. "Yes, I'll marry you again." Applause thundered around them, guests moved by the raw display of devotion. Henry slipped the ring onto Fiona's finger, and they embraced, Grace giggling between them. It wasn't a perfect ending to a fairy tale. It was the start of a life built on second chances, a life more real and profound than any fleeting dream of riches. In the months that followed, Henry and Fiona renewed their vows in an intimate ceremony at the same botanical garden where he had first proposed. Surrounded by a handful of close friends and family, they promised to support each other through all storms, no longer blinded by unchecked ambition or hidden fears. Angela stood as Fiona's bridesmaid, while Mark Johnson, who had safeguarded Fiona's interests, officiated the ceremony, a reflection of how integral he'd become to their family's better future. With sincere effort and mutual respect, they forged ahead. Henry scaled back his once overwhelming empire, channeling funds into charitable projects dear to Fiona's heart. Grace thrived into a curious toddler, her laughter a fixture in their home. And Fiona herself emerged a force in the philanthropic world, using her story to champion healthcare reforms and maternal support programs. They had faced the brink of devastation, a marriage on life support, a child born prematurely, financial betrayals, and health crises. But through the crucible of adversity, they discovered what truly mattered: love, resilience, and the simple fact that life's greatest treasures can't be stored in offshore accounts. It's not a fairy tale with a neat ending. It's the ongoing story of two flawed people choosing to heal together every single day. New beginnings can bloom in the darkest seasons, and Fiona's remarkable journey proves just that. After all the betrayals, the heartbreak, and the life-threatening moments, she emerged stronger, securing her health, protecting her child, and even rebuilding her marriage on firmer ground. Her courage reminds us that resilience isn't about avoiding hardship, it's about facing it head-on and daring to rewrite the ending. Now, we want you to be part of spreading Fiona's empowering message.
Millionaire took his mistress on a baby moon meant for his pregnant wife. The wife took his empire. Instead, they say some secrets are too ugly to stay hidden, and for millionaire businessman Marcus Donovan, that secret was about to explode in the middle of a picture-perfect life with his pregnant wife. Eleanor rumors started swirling. Another woman. Juliana was seen on a luxurious baby moon trip in the Mediterranean. But it was no innocent coincidence. That trip had been planned for Eleanor. If only she knew how her world was about to change forever, or how she would rise like a phoenix from the ashes of betrayal to snatch the empire that Marcus believed was his alone. This is a twisted tale of karma's grand design. From the outside looking in, Marcus Donovan appeared to have every advantage. Born into a modest but loving family in the suburbs of Baltimore, he was raised by two hard-working parents who always pushed him to chase his dreams. His father, Gregory Donovan, labored at a local construction firm, while his mother, Martha Donovan, balanced two jobs as a part-time librarian and a seamstress. Despite their limited means, they poured every last drop of their energy into their only child's future. Marcus grew up witnessing their relentless dedication to forging a better life, and it shaped him into a man determined to succeed, no matter the cost. By the time he was in college at the University of Pennsylvania, majoring in business administration, Marcus was already known for his unmatched ambition. He interned at Anderson and Crowley, a well-regarded investment firm, where he had a knack for impressing powerful executives. They saw him not just as a bright mind, but as someone who could influence others with his charm. He had a disarming smile, a smooth voice, and a razor-sharp intellect. Everyone predicted his meteoric rise. It felt inevitable. It was during a university networking event that he met Eleanor Taylor, a graduate student in art history who was volunteering for the fundraiser. What started as a brief conversation about Renaissance art blossomed into an unanticipated bond. Eleanor's kind, unassuming spirit and genuine curiosity about life and culture captivated Marcus in ways he never experienced before. She came from a quiet, artistic family. Her mother, Lucinda Taylor, was a painter, and her father, Robert Taylor, taught music at a conservatory. Unlike Marcus's intense drive for business success, Eleanor dreamed of opening a small gallery to showcase her mother's and other emerging artists' work. Although their pursuits were seemingly dissimilar, the synergy between them was magnetic. Marcus loved that Eleanor's perspective gave him a refuge from the relentless hustle of his business environment. She, in turn, admired his ambition and believed in his potential to do great things. He gave her the confidence to dream bigger. She gave him the humility to remember that riches went far beyond what sat in a bank account. For a while, the relationship was pure bliss. Late-night study sessions, peppered with stolen kisses in the university library, romantic walks through Philadelphia's cobblestone streets, and unwavering support in each other's endeavors. Even as Marcus was pulled deeper into the world of high-stakes finance, he managed to carve out time for Eleanor. He promised her a future that glowed with love and adventure. "I'll give you the world," he would say, sealing it with a spontaneous weekend trip to some quaint bed and breakfast. Eleanor, an idealist at heart, believed in his vow wholeheartedly. When he proposed getting down on one knee in front of 100 flickering candles at her favorite local art gallery, she couldn't say yes fast enough. Their wedding in upstate New York was attended by family close friends and a smattering of powerful business connections that Marcus had made. It seemed like the start of a dream that would only grow more vibrant with time. But with the passage of years, the dream changed shape. As Marcus soared in his career, starting Donovan Capital Ventures and establishing connections with Silicon Valley elites, Wall Street executives, and international investors, the simple joys of everyday life slipped out of his reach. He and Eleanor were still deeply in love, but their time together dwindled. Business dinners, conferences, and networking events took precedence. Eleanor struggled with the sense that she was losing the man she had pledged her life to, though she tried her best to stay supportive. She started hosting art events to keep herself busy and to offer a platform for her mother's work. Yet she always tried to leave the front porch light on, hoping Marcus would come home early and remind her they were still the same people who once found refuge in each other's arms. Behind the polished veneer of success, cracks were forming cracks that wouldn't show themselves until life took a dramatic, life-altering turn. A year into their new life of glittering galas and high roller gatherings, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Marcus one morning as he was rushing to finalize a major overseas deal. He was halfway out the door, coffee in one hand and a phone pressed to his ear, when she pulled him aside, eyes brimming with an anxious excitement. "Marcus," she said softly, "I'm pregnant." The moment froze. The phone call, the multi-million-dollar contract, waiting the business world swirling around him, it all faded. In that second, it was just him, Eleanor, and the promise of new life. He lifted her into his arms, tears of joy reflecting in both of their eyes. For the first time in a long time, the tension of business deals, deadlines, and responsibilities melted away. Life felt simple and hopeful again. Eleanor was 3 months pregnant when they decided to host a celebratory dinner at an upscale restaurant called the Redwood Lounge in Manhattan. They reserved a private room and invited their closest circle of friends and family, Marcus's parents. Gregory and Martha were there, beaming with pride. Eleanor's parents, Lucinda and Robert, were equally ecstatic. Champagne flowed, though Eleanor stuck to her sparkling grape juice. Amid toasts and laughter, Marcus promised again he would step back from the intensity of his schedule and be there for his growing family. He asked everyone to raise a glass and said, "To our unborn child and to the bright future we'll share." A wave of applause and cheers filled the room. In the weeks that followed, life felt like it was returning to that earlier state of bliss. Marcus took Eleanor to her doctor's appointments. He'd spend Saturdays helping her organize the spare room in their penthouse into a nursery, He even started thinking about a baby moon, a pre-birth vacation for them to unwind and connect before the baby arrived. Eleanor's face lit up when he proposed 2 weeks in the south of France. It was a grand romantic gesture that made her hopeful they were truly turning a corner. But the closer they got to finalizing the trip dates, the more frequently those old habits crept in. Marcus would be called away on urgent business, or else he'd lock himself in his home office for hours glued to conference calls with Hong Kong investors. His free time evaporated again. Eleanor worried that if this was the pattern before the baby even arrived, how would he adjust once a newborn demanded all their attention and energy? Nonetheless, she kept faith. She knew business deals could be unpredictable, especially when millions of dollars were at stake. She rationalized, "He's doing this for us. He wants to secure our future. He'll be there when it matters most." It was a mantra she repeated each night, even as she felt the creeping loneliness that threatened to overshadow what should have been the happiest time of her life. Marcus, on the other hand, juggled overwhelming stress from multiple fronts. Donovan Capital Ventures was in a prime expansion phase, and missing crucial deals could mean losing the momentum he'd built over a decade. He justified each missed doctor's appointment and each cancelled dinner by telling himself that once the deals were sealed, he'd have the money and reputation to provide a life of comfort, no luxury for Eleanor and their child. So he pushed on day after day, fueling himself with ambition and adrenaline, hardly noticing that he was accelerating toward a moral precipice. As Donovan Capital Ventures expanded, Marcus came into contact with an even wider circle of corporate bigwigs, international deal-makers and socialites. One such acquaintance was Lawrence Chen, an influential tech magnate who had a flair for elaborate parties. Through Lawrence, Marcus found himself invited to exclusive yacht soirees on the Mediterranean high-stakes poker nights in Macau and lavish ski trips in the Swiss Alps. All these gatherings promised not only entertainment, but also a direct line to the world's wealthiest decision-makers. It was at one of Lawrence's high-profile events that Marcus first encountered Giuliana Moretti. She was an Italian-Brazilian heiress with a well-known family name, rumored to be an aspiring fashion designer, tall and poised with a graceful yet predatory air. She was the kind of woman who seemed to float through a room, drawing every eye. Her conversation was as sharp as her appearance. She'd spent her youth studying in the finest boarding schools in Europe, and she spoke 4 languages fluently. She seemed genuinely intrigued by Marcus's success story, or at least that's how she presented herself. He first noticed her at a New York charity gala, swirling her champagne and laughing with a group of media moguls. Their eyes locked, and for a brief moment, Marcus felt that old spark of curiosity. She was mesmerizing in a way that was impossible to ignore. After a polite introduction, they engaged in small talk about the charity's mission. Within minutes, they pivoted to more personal topics: her upcoming fashion line, his global expansion strategies, her travels across Asia. Giuliana lavished him with compliments that flattered not just his ego, but the deeper part of him that felt underappreciated and overstretched. She seemed to understand the pressures he was under, empathizing with the burden of steering a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Although he told himself it was harmless, Marcus began inviting Giuliana to smaller get-togethers with key investors. He valued her social acumen and thought she could help lubricate business discussions with her grace and wit. One dinner turned into another. Soon casual texts about upcoming events drifted into more personal territory. Giuliana was skilled at emotional lure, often sending messages late at night when Marcus's defenses were down. "I'm thinking of you. Hope you're getting some rest." Or, "You looked so stressed today. Remember to take care of yourself." Her words ignited a feeling of being seen and validated in a way he hadn't felt for months, the lines blurred so subtly that Marcus wasn't sure when their professional rapport shifted into a personal affair. Perhaps it was the night they attended an after-party in Monaco, where the champagne never stopped flowing, the music pulsed till dawn, and everyone else seemed consumed by their own indulgences. In a moment of disoriented excitement, Marcus found himself alone on a balcony with Juliana. The moon glistened on the sea below, and her perfume swirled around him like an intoxicating promise. Before he fully comprehended, they were locked in a passionate kiss. The guilt that followed was profound, yet not enough to halt what they had begun. He told himself it was a one-time slip. However, the affair continued clandestine, but thrilling, fueling him with a sense of danger and novelty that overshadowed the moral voice within. Each time he returned home to Eleanor, who was by then visibly pregnant and glowing with maternal radiance, he felt a dual wave of shame and heartbreak. He still loved Eleanor, or so he claimed, yet he couldn't shake the magnetism of Juliana, the adrenaline rush of their secret. Despite these pangs of conscience, he rationalized that it was his life too. He'd worked endlessly for success, so he had earned an escape from the daily grind. He believed that as long as Eleanor never found out, no harm was done. After all, he was still providing for his wife and child. He still intended to keep his promise of giving them everything, but in the hidden corners of his mind, even he couldn't ignore the flicker of trepidation. Some part of him knew that if Eleanor discovered his betrayal, it would unravel everything. By the 7th month of Eleanor's pregnancy, her doctor recommended a period of rest and relaxation. High blood pressure and stress were common in first-time mothers, and a calm environment could make all the difference. Eleanor, remembering Marcus's initial grand suggestion of a trip to the south of France, brought up the possibility again. Her voice carried a quiet plea. "You said we would go together, just you and me, before the baby arrives." He nodded absently, scanning through his phone's endless alerts. She cradled her expanding belly, waiting for him to look at her with warmth, waiting for the man she once knew to surface. Finally, he pressed his phone's screen off right, of course. A baby moon. He smiled, but it felt forced. "Let me get my schedule in order, and we'll plan something special." Eleanor's face lit with hope. She felt a gush of relief that perhaps the old Marcus was still there under the layers of suits, spreadsheets, and urgent phone calls. She suggested a quaint coastal town in the south of France, perhaps Cassis or Antibes, somewhere quieter than the usual tourist hotspots. He agreed, half listening, half distracted by the beeping of another incoming message. Within days, however, business crises flared up like wildfires. An investor in Hong Kong threatened to pull out of a major deal. A West Coast tech company's stock was plummeting, which threatened Donovan Capital's stake. Conference calls spanned time zones. Meetings doubled, then tripled. Every day, Marcus found a new reason to postpone the trip. "Just one more week," he kept promising. "We'll head out as soon as I sort this out." Eleanor tried to remain patient. She decorated the nursery carefully, choosing pastel shades of green and yellow. She arranged for a local carpenter to craft a handmade crib. She even started prenatal yoga to maintain her health and manage her stress. Still, the longing to spend meaningful time with Marcus grew stronger, and the heartbreak of repeated postponements deepened. In the midst of that turmoil, a cunning idea crept into Juliana's mind. She knew all about the baby moon plan. Marcus had once carelessly mentioned it, not realizing how it might ignite her envy. Juliana wanted Marcus to herself, unencumbered by marital obligations or the looming presence of a child. She manipulated him, planting seeds of discontent and urging him to take her somewhere far from the prying eyes of the media and corporate watchers. For once, she wanted to see if Marcus would pick her convenience over his wife's rightful place. Marcus, exhausted and lured by the promise of unrestrained pleasure, found himself agreeing. In a moment of self-delusion, he convinced himself that a quick getaway with Juliana was a better move. He could merge leisure with networking, claiming that she had connections to an international fashion mogul who could become a valuable investor. In the twisted logic of a man who had already begun to tangle his moral compass, it seemed justifiable. So he booked the flights, 4 days in the south of France. Luxury suite at an exclusive resort in Cannes, complete with private beach access and a dedicated concierge, he told Eleanor he had to leave unexpectedly for a business emergency in Europe. She was nearly 8 months pregnant, but the heartbreak in her eyes didn't stop him. He packed his suitcase hurriedly one afternoon, gave her a tepid kiss on the cheek, and said he'd call every day. As Marcus and Juliana soared across the Atlantic, Eleanor was left alone in the penthouse, the baby moon brochures still on the kitchen counter, mocking the dream that was never realized. She felt a swelling ache in her chest, part anxiety, part suspicion. Although she wanted to believe him, cracks in her trust had begun to form. She sensed that something was off, but she couldn't yet piece it together. In Cannes, Marcus and Juliana basked in the sun, sipping on exotic cocktails under striped beach umbrellas. They indulged in gourmet meals, danced late into the night, and posted snippets of their lavish escapade on social media, albeit carefully curated, to avoid revealing each other's identities. Too blatantly, Marcus's official story was that this was a critical investor meeting. But in a world as interconnected as theirs, secrets can slip through the cracks faster than a wave receding on the shore. A paparazzo named Henri Lambert was trailing various celebrities that weekend. He was known for sniffing out the hidden corners where Europe's rich and famous frolicked away from public view. While scanning the beach for a rumored Hollywood couple, he stumbled upon Marcus Donovan and Juliana Moretti instead. At first, he couldn't believe his luck. Marcus Donovan was a rising star in the finance world, rumored to be squeaky clean and happily married. Yet here he was, comfortably entwined with a woman who was definitely not his pregnant wife. Henry snapped a flurry of photos, the two of them sipping wine on a balcony, Juliana leaning in to whisper in Marcus's ear a playful kiss on the cheek. None of it left any plausible deniability. Henry knew he had gold in his camera, a scandal involving a high-profile millionaire about to become a father, tabloid heaven. He quickly sold the photos to a gossip website known as the Gold Coast Insider. Within hours, the pictures went viral. Social media platforms lit up with speculation. Who is this mystery woman? Where is his wife? The images were accompanied by headlines dripping with condemnation. Marcus Donovan's secret. Baby moon with mistress finance, mogul in a scandalous affair. Even mainstream news sites picked up the rumor mill Eleanor was home in New York, nursing an aching back and reading baby blogs when her phone buzzed non-stop. She opened one message to find a link from an old college friend. "Elle, please, tell me this isn't real." Followed by the incriminating photos. For a heartbeat, she felt like the ground caved in beneath her. The images showed Marcus in an unmistakably intimate pose with a glamorous brunette. Shock turned to devastation, then to rising anger. Betrayal scorched through her veins. She slumped on the living room couch, tears falling silently as she clutched her pregnancy bump. How could he do this to her, to them? Her phone calls to Marcus went unanswered. She tried texting him, but the messages remained unread. In a panic, she called her mother, Lucinda, who arrived within the hour, enveloping Eleanor in a maternal hug that momentarily soothed her shattered heart. Yet not even a mother's love could fully dull the sting of this calamity. The headlines were everywhere, and the story was unstoppable. When Marcus finally saw the tabloid news panic set in, he tried to contact his public relations team to mitigate the scandal, but the damage was already colossal. Investors started asking questions. His phone rang incessantly, with messages from business partners furious that this personal fiasco might tarnish their brand associations. Most of all, though, he dreaded hearing from Eleanor. He was 1,000 miles away, physically and emotionally, with no immediate plan to rectify the devastation he'd unleashed. Juliana, on the other hand, feigned worry, but secretly relished the storm. In her mind, this was an opportunity to force Marcus's hand. If his marriage was irrevocably damaged, he might choose her. She coaxed him, telling him that everything would be fine, that he could spin the narrative, but deep down she knew the path to power was lit up before her. Back in New York, Eleanor quietly fumed. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a sense of betrayal that ignited a newfound resolve in her. She felt her unborn child move inside her, and that reminder filled her with fierce determination. The man she loved had humiliated her on a global stage. The father of her child had broken the final bond of trust. Through her tears, a seed of defiance began to grow. She would not crumble and be the sympathetic, powerless wife in this story. She would fight for her dignity and for her child's future. When Marcus returned to New York, the scandal was already raging. Eleanor met him in their penthouse, calm, composed, but with a steely gaze. "You've humiliated me," she said quietly. "You broke everything we built. I won't be a forgotten footnote in your story." Without drama or tears, Eleanor began to act. She may not have held financial power, but she knew her emotional and strategic contributions had helped shape Donovan Capital from the beginning. She hired Danielle Pierce, a formidable divorce lawyer, known for high-stakes corporate cases. Quietly they gathered evidence, financial records, contracts, early investments, all proving Eleanor's unseen influence in Marcus's empire. While Marcus focused on salvaging his image, Eleanor was preparing for war. Then came Juliana's twist, a sudden message claiming she was pregnant. Whether true or not, it rattled Marcus. But for Eleanor, it only fueled her resolve. She wasn't going to shield him anymore. With her baby due soon and the media still circling, Eleanor temporarily left the penthouse for her parents' quiet home. She wasn't retreating, she was regrouping. This time not as the betrayed wife, but as a woman ready to claim what was rightfully hers. As Eleanor's due date approached, the media frenzy refused to die down. Tongues wagged about whether she'd name Marcus as the father on the birth certificate if they proceeded with divorce. Stock in Donovan Capital Ventures dipped as rumors circulated that the founder was on the brink of losing control of his assets. Rival companies circled like sharks, ready to snap up clients or key employees who questioned Donovan Capital's stability. Under the weight of all these pressures, Marcus seemed to crumble. His once unshakable self-confidence slipped into desperation. He called Eleanor multiple times a day, begging for a face-to-face meeting. She granted him a single meeting under the watchful eye of her lawyer, Danielle Pierce, at a neutral location, a private conference room at Clark and Grayton. Law firm. When Marcus arrived, he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, suit jacket hanging off his once proud shoulders. Eleanor, on the other hand, wore a simple navy maternity dress and radiated a quiet strength. She was mere weeks away from delivering her belly, a poignant reminder of all that was at stake. Marcus attempted a gentle approach. "Eleanor, I've made terrible mistakes," he said, voice trembling. "I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting sorrow and disappointment. Danielle, seated beside her, remained silent, but watchful. Finally, Eleanor replied softly, "We cannot be fixed." "Marcus, you did not just break our vows, you shattered my trust. That is something I can't repair. I'm here to discuss a settlement only for the sake of our child's future." Marcus pleaded for a second chance, enumerating the ways he could make amends. He would cut off Juliana completely, vow fidelity, attend therapy. However, the time for contrition had passed. Eleanor made it clear she wanted a divorce, and not just a simple one. She wanted a fair share of the empire, citing her intangible but vital contributions to the business's growth. Danielle slid a carefully prepared document across the table, listing assets that would be put in Eleanor's name. It included a controlling stake of certain business ventures, real estate properties, and trust funds for the child. Marcus's face blanched. His initial reaction was disbelief, followed by anger. "This is absurd," he spat. "You have no right to dismantle my company." Danielle calmly explained the legal precedents supporting Eleanor's case. She detailed how the intangible contributions of a spouse could factor into a divorce settlement, particularly given the nature of how Donovan Capital Ventures expanded. She hinted at potential reputational damage if certain internal documents were made public. This was the final straw. The unspoken threat of financial audits, negative media attention, and investor flight made Marcus realize that losing a large portion of his empire might be unavoidable if he didn't negotiate. The meeting concluded in a cold standoff. Marcus stormed out, furious at Danielle, and by extension, furious at Eleanor. For her part, Eleanor left feeling both liberated and terrified. She was stepping into an unknown future, but at least she was no longer treading water in the whirlpool of Marcus's transgressions. She returned to her parents' home, trying to focus on her baby's imminent arrival, rather than the storm swirling around her. Eleanor went into labor on a quiet Sunday morning. The world outside was still enthralled with the scandal, but within the walls of Lucinda and Robert Taylor's home, all that mattered was bringing new life into the world. With her mother and a private doula by her side, Eleanor felt contractions that intensified by the hour Marcus received a call from Eleanor's mother, telling him that he could come to the hospital if he wished Eleanor had agreed for him to be present, not as her partner, but as the father of the child. Despite the tension, she believed their baby had the right to both parents at the birth. In a rush of guilt and paternal instinct, Marcus cancelled his meetings and raced to Mount Sinai Hospital. When he arrived, Eleanor was already in active labor, sweat beading on her forehead, breathing heavily through contractions. She acknowledged his presence with a nod. There was no forgiveness in her eyes, but there was also no malice at that moment. Whatever had passed between them, they were both there to welcome their child. After hours of determined pushing, baby Henry Donovan entered the world with a hearty cry. He had Eleanor's delicate features, but Marcus's intense gaze. Watching him take his first breath brought tears to Marcus's eyes. Tears of awe, shame, and overwhelming emotion. Eleanor spent from the labor, cradled Henry gently, all her focus on this tiny being who held the promise of a new beginning. For a brief time, the hospital room seemed suspended in tranquility. Marcus murmured an apology to Eleanor, and she simply nodded, too exhausted to pass the complexities of their fractured relationship. The press inevitably got wind of the birth, but the hospital's security kept them at bay. Danielle discreetly arranged for an extended stay so Eleanor could recover, without the media circus camped outside her door. Yet the respite was short-lived. Once Henry was born, the details of the divorce settlement took on a new urgency. Even as he marveled at his newborn son, Marcus was bombarded by calls from his lawyers urging him to avoid signing away the empire. He faced a decision: risk a protracted legal battle that could drag on for years and wreak havoc on his business reputation, or meet Eleanor's demands for a settlement that would permanently alter his fortune. During one of Eleanor's quieter moments in the hospital, Marcus approached her. "I don't want to fight you in court. Our child shouldn't grow up watching us tear each other apart." Eleanor studied him, her expression neutral. She too didn't want a prolonged battle, especially with Henry's future to consider. She simply stated, "Then come to an agreement with Danielle. Stop trying to cling to power because in the end, you'll lose more than just money." In that moment, Marcus glimpsed anew Eleanor resolved, resilient, and far from the naive, gentle soul he had once taken for granted. He recognized that she was not only fighting for her own dignity, but for the child they had brought into the world. Though a flicker of pride stirred in his heart at her strength, it was overshadowed by the realization that he was on the losing side of this battle. Morally, and soon financially, Eleanor Donovan sat in the back seat of a black SUV, its tinted windows shielding her from the flashbulbs that exploded along Manhattan's bustling sidewalks. Cradling baby Henry in her arms, she felt a surge of protectiveness and an equal measure of quiet determination. The day had finally come for her legal team to square off with Marcus and his lawyers. She gazed through the tinted glass at the soaring skyscrapers. Once this city had symbolized the pinnacle of her husband's ambition, now it was the stage on which she would fight for her dignity, her child's future, and a fair claim to the empire she had helped build. The legal battleground was the top-floor conference suite at Clark & Grayton law firm, a stately glass tower rising like a monolith of power in midtown Manhattan. Eleanor's lawyer, Danielle Pierce, was known in elite circles as the litigator you'd hire if you had everything to lose. She had already amassed hundreds of files, emails and financial statements that documented the many ways Eleanor had contributed, directly or indirectly, to the expansion of Donovan Capital Ventures. And yet Danielle insisted on another layer of evidence, personal testimony about Eleanor's role behind the scenes. The intangible but crucial ways she had secured philanthropic deals and introduced Marcus to key art investors now held center stage in the negotiations. In the weeks leading up to the showdown, Danielle worked around the clock. She had enlisted the help of forensic accountants to comb through Donovan Capital's labyrinthine web of offshore companies and shell subsidiaries. Every questionable transaction that might hint at hidden funds or deliberate concealments was highlighted and sorted into neat binders. There were also frantic late-night calls with potential witnesses like the couple's longtime financial advisor, Richard Albright, who'd confided how Eleanor's early inheritance had covered some of Marcus's high-risk investments. Eleanor had never bragged about that early contribution. She had believed in her husband wholeheartedly and wanted to see his dreams come true. Now that goodwill became proof of her rightful claim. Meanwhile, Marcus's legal team was scrambling to protect him. They were led by a seasoned corporate attorney named Vivian Hill, known for her no-nonsense style and an unflinching loyalty to wealthy executives. Vivian's approach was simple: attack, discredit, and minimize Eleanor's role. She intended to lean on the couple's prenuptial agreement, a document that on paper seemed to limit Eleanor's share should the marriage dissolve. But as Danielle Pierce liked to remind people in such high-stakes divorces, no prenup is bulletproof when moral turpitude and undisclosed assets come into play. Eleanor didn't attend the initial round of negotiations. Holding a newborn in a stuffy boardroom filled with adversaries was the last thing she wanted. Instead, she stayed in the comfort of her Brooklyn townhouse, nursing Henry, while Danielle and her associate Martin Feldman headed the talks. But the moment Danielle walked through those heavy glass doors, the tension was palpable. On one side of the long mahogany table, Marcus Donovan sat stiff-backed arms, folded protectively over his chest. His once impeccable confidence was fraying at the edges. Dark circles beneath his eyes hinted at nights lost to worry. The CFO of Donovan Capital, Daniel Redwood, a private confidant to Marcus for years, sat beside him in a pinstriped suit, methodically tapping a pen against a legal pad. Redwood's face gave nothing away, but the deeper lines on his brow suggested he knew exactly how precarious Marcus's position had become. Across from them was Danielle, impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that seemed tailored to exude power. Her eyes flicked over the group in a cool, assessing glance, zeroing in on Marcus. "You did this to yourself, buddy," she seemed to say. Without uttering a word, Vivian Hill cleared her throat and began. "My client is prepared to offer a sizable monetary settlement," she said, handing out typed sheets. "We respect Mrs. Donovan's contributions, but we believe the prenuptial agreement stands." Danielle allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She flipped through the pages without so much as a pause, and then calmly placed them on the table. "My client seeks more than a one-time payout. She seeks ongoing support for the child. Yes, but also recognition of the intangible support she gave to Donovan Capital. We have itemized evidence, emails, schedules, financial entries, showing how Mrs. Donovan facilitated multiple investor introductions and philanthropic partnerships that led to direct profitability for Donovan Capital." Vivian bristled but maintained her composure. "We dispute the scope of those contributions." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps we should discuss the early loan from Mrs. Donovan's inheritance, which helped your client secure the original office space and cover those initial margin calls during Donovan Capital's first expansion phase. I believe the figure was," she checked a document, $250,000, hardly pocket change. "We also have Mr. Richard Albright, the couple's longtime financial advisor, ready to testify that Mrs. Donovan's involvement was fundamental to the firm's survival in its infancy." Marcus's expression darkened. He had hoped that early personal loan would remain a forgotten piece of ancient history, but Danielle was resurrecting every skeleton buried in Donovan Capital's closet. Even as the negotiations grew heated, an unspoken spectre hovered over the table. Juliana Moretti, the mistress whose presence had triggered the avalanche of scandal. Though physically absent from the boardroom, her impact was undeniable. Gossip rags still speculated about her rumored pregnancy. Investors quietly mulled whether Donovan Capital was hemorrhaging funds to appease her. And in hushed conversations, people wondered if Juliana might sell her story to a tell-all publication. As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed noisily, cutting through the tense silence. He glanced at it and his jaw tightened. Danielle raised an eyebrow. Vivian slammed a folder shut, irate at the interruption. "We need a moment," Vivian announced, escorting Marcus into an adjacent private lounge. Inside the lounge, Marcus exhaled heavily. He stared at the text from Juliana. "We have unfinished business. If you don't meet me tonight, I'll go public." It was a threat she'd lobbed before, but in the heat of divorce negotiations, the stakes were higher than ever. "Is it her?" Vivian asked, arms crossed. "Yeah," Marcus muttered, rubbing his temples. "She's threatening to spill everything if I don't." Vivian cut him off, voice low with frustration. "We don't have time for this. We're already negotiating from a position of weakness. Danielle Pierce has evidence that could shred your reputation if it goes to trial. If Juliana also goes to the media, it's over. You'll lose what little leverage you have left." Marcus felt a swell of anger mingle with defeat. He wanted to lash out, to break something, to be rid of Juliana and her manipulations. But he was caught trapped by the consequences of his own betrayal. "What do I do?" he asked, almost whispering. "Handle it," Vivian said sharply. "Shut her down. Get her to sign an NDA. Throw money at her if you must. But do not let her sabotage these negotiations." When they returned to the conference room, Danielle and Martin were exchanging quiet words. Danielle looked up, assessing Marcus's grim expression. She could guess Juliana had just made her presence known again. Good, Danielle thought. Let him squirm. It only strengthened her side of the table. The negotiations resumed, and over the course of the next 3 hours the atmosphere grew even heavier. Danielle meticulously dissected Donovan Capital's structure, pointing to subsidiary after subsidiary that had flourished because of philanthropic connections forged by Eleanor. She cited philanthropic galas, where Eleanor had introduced Marcus to major art patrons like Penelope Carnegie, who later became a silent investor. She had emails confirming Eleanor's role in persuading a West Coast museum patron to place $1 million trust with Donovan Capital. On and on it went, each bullet point chipping away at the notion that Eleanor was merely a supportive spouse with no legal claim. Marcus's lawyers attempted to minimize and deflect. "These are normal acts of spousal support," Vivian stated firmly. "They don't necessarily translate into equity stakes or managerial control." Danielle caught Marcus's gaze. "My client is not asking for half the company," she explained, voice firm but measured. "She wants an equitable share, reflecting the intangible contributions that were instrumental in turning Donovan Capital into the success it is today. Moreover, she wants a controlling interest in the philanthropic branch, which was largely her brainchild." Marcus's brow furrowed. The philanthropic branch. A small part of the firm, yes, but one with growing influence and positive press. Handing it over would mean giving Eleanor a permanent seat at the table of Donovan Capital's future. He imagined the headlines, "Eleanor Donovan heads, philanthropic ventures after high-profile divorce." It made him feel nauseous, but his options were dwindling by the second. Redwood leaned in and whispered something to Marcus, presumably about the potential damage to investor confidence if the negotiations dragged on. Marcus nodded curtly, then turned to Vivian. They shared a brief, tense exchange of whispers. Finally, Vivian laid down her pen. "We will consider this philanthropic branch as negotiable." Danielle's eyes flicked to Martin, a silent note of victory passing between them. The philanthropic division was not just a footnote in Donovan Capital's portfolio. It was a rising star with significant press coverage for eco-friendly initiatives and socially responsible tech investments. Ceding control of it was a symbolic blow to Marcus's legacy. What followed was a grueling carousel of back-and-forth bartering. Marcus offered a one-time payout that would set Eleanor up for life. Danielle refused unless it included child support, reflecting the lifestyle Henry would have had if the marriage remained intact. When Marcus's team countered with a smaller monthly figure, Danielle threatened to reveal offshore accounts and questionable business practices. In open court, a guaranteed feeding frenzy for regulators and tabloids alike. Eleanor, following the negotiations from her home through text updates from Danielle, felt a swirl of emotions. Part of her despised the transactional nature of these talks. "This is my life," she thought. My marriage. But there was no denying that wealth was a tool to secure a stable future for her son. She reminded herself that no amount of money could replace the trust Marcus had shattered, but it could ensure Henry never lacked for opportunity. Meanwhile, as the hours stretched, Marcus's phone kept buzzing. Juliana's messages grew more desperate. Answer me or face the consequences. He battled the urge to throw his phone across the room. Danielle noticed his agitation and made a mental note that Juliana's tactics were likely driving him to make hurried decisions, an advantage for her client. At around 7 in the evening, both teams called for a recess, leaving the table strewn with legal pads, half-empty coffee cups, and a storm of scattered documents. Marcus slumped in his chair, loosened his tie, and rubbed his eyes. In the hallway, Redwood took a phone call from the Donovan Capital Board, who demanded an update. The board was growing furious at the negative media coverage. They wanted this scandal tidied up faster. Danielle and Martin stepped into a private corner where they whispered about final strategies. If we push him on philanthropic control, we can likely secure a stake in that ecotech subsidiary too. Martin suggested. Danielle nodded, eyes gleaming. With the board pushing Marcus to settle, he was more malleable to their demands. She drafted a quick bullet list on her tablet, preparing for one last push when they reconvened. An hour later, the negotiations climaxed. Vivian, clearly exasperated, announced, "We have a client who is willing to cooperate, but only if the settlement includes confidentiality clauses about Donovan Capital's internal finances." Danielle nodded. "We can include mutual NDAs on the finances, on the condition that Mrs. Donovan retains complete ownership of the philanthropic branch and partial equity in the ecotech spin-off." She handed over a revised agreement. "Sign this tonight, or we walk away and proceed to trial." Marcus locked eyes with Danielle, then lowered his gaze to the document. He knew this was the best offer he'd get. If he went to court, Danielle could drag out every skeleton in Donovan Capital's closet, not just the affair, but any shady financial corners he'd cut in the firm's early days. Share prices would plummet, and the board would oust him for good. He gave a weary nod to Vivian, who let out a resigned sigh and pushed the papers across the table. "Donovan," Vivian said, extending a pen sign here. Marcus gripped the pen, his gaze distant, as he scrawled his signature in the designated boxes. With each stroke of ink, a chunk of his empire slipped away. Danielle carefully collected the documents. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan," she said, her tone formal. She tapped them into a neat stack and placed them in her briefcase. "My client appreciates your cooperation, and I'll have the final copies delivered to you by tomorrow." Standing, Marcus thrust his hands into his pockets and stared at the floor. He'd never felt so powerless. The hush in the room was thick with finality. Later that night in her Brooklyn townhouse, Eleanor received a phone call from Danielle. "It's done," Danielle announced. "We have controlling interest of the philanthropic branch, partial equity in ecotech, sufficient child support, and a non-disclosure arrangement to protect your personal details. Henry will be well provided for, and you'll have the freedom to guide the philanthropy division. However you see fit." Eleanor closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Relief mingled with a pang of sorrow. She'd stood up for herself and won. But it had come at the cost of accepting that her marriage and the man she'd once adored were lost to a web of lies and betrayal. Still, as she looked down at baby Henry, dozing in a bassinet nearby, she felt a flicker of hope. He would never want for stability or security. She had ensured that his future wasn't tied to Marcus's reckless choices. Across town, Marcus sat alone in his penthouse, now stripped of many personal touches, as Eleanor's belongings had been removed. The echoing silence was almost cruel. His phone buzzed again. Juliana, no doubt. He stared at the screen but couldn't bring himself to answer. His empire was in freefall, his reputation tarnished, and the only family he had now seemed beyond his reach. He sank into a leather armchair, head in his hands, as the lights of the city stretched out below him in apathetic indifference. The legal war was over, but the aftermath would ripple for years. In the eyes of the world, Eleanor had seized a critical piece of Donovan Capital's future, an accomplishment that would soon send her star rising in philanthropic and business circles alike. Marcus, once hailed as a visionary titan, watched his kingdom fracture under the weight of his own hubris. And somewhere out there, in the swirl of scandal and secrecy, Juliana Moretti plotted her next move, determined to claim whatever she could from the empire's wreckage. But for Eleanor, the greatest triumph was not the money or even the philanthropic branch. It was reclaiming her autonomy, proving that she was more than just a shadow in Marcus's ambitious world. The settlement marked an end, yet for her and Henry, it was also the quiet beginning of a far more authentic life, one built on the unshakable foundation of self-respect and unconditional love. In the weeks after the settlement, life moved at a breathless pace. Marcus attempted damage control with his board, reassuring them that Donovan Capital Ventures still had strong leadership. However, the trust between him and his key partners was irrevocably eroded. Several major investors parted ways, citing moral and reputational concerns. Others demanded restructuring that further diluted Marcus's control. Juliana's claims of pregnancy were eventually discredited. She had never provided legitimate proof, and many suspected it was a ploy, jilted and humiliated. She slinked off to Europe, facing her own set of gossip. By contrast, Eleanor found a surprising sense of renewal. She relocated to a serene townhouse in a family-friendly neighborhood in Brooklyn. With her parents' help, she furnished the space so it exuded warmth and creativity. Local artwork on the walls, a cozy reading nook by the window, and a sunlit nursery for Henry between breastfeeding late-night lullabies and the occasional meltdown. She felt more alive than ever. There was sadness still for the broken dreams and the man she once loved. But she also felt unshackled free to chart her own course. Despite not being a ruthless business tycoon, Eleanor found herself thrust into an unexpected position of power. The philanthropic branch of Donovan Capital that she controlled needed direction, and she gave it wholeheartedly. She rebranded it as the Green Horizon Fund, focusing on eco-sustainability, social justice initiatives, and arts in underprivileged communities. She hired a small team of like-minded individuals, some from Marcus's circle, who felt more aligned with her vision. In an ironic twist, the Green Horizon Fund quickly garnered positive media attention, drawing in philanthropic entrepreneurs who had grown skeptical of traditional profit-obsessed finance. Financially secure from the divorce settlement, Eleanor didn't have to scramble for revenue. Instead, she invested her emotional energy in building a legacy that Henry could be proud of. The mother who once quietly supported her husband's dream now became a leader in her own right. And the world noticed, meanwhile. Marcus struggled in the shadows. The scandal's aftershocks still rippled through the corporate world, making every new partnership a challenge. He sold off some properties to maintain the liquidity needed to stabilize Donovan Capital. Investors demanded transparency, and he spent sleepless nights just trying to preserve what was left. The flamboyant lifestyle he once enjoyed with private jets and lavish parties was replaced by frantic damage control dinners and closed-door negotiations. The final blow, Karma's crowning moment, arrived when a whistleblower from Juliana's circle leaked incriminating details of Marcus's offshore accounts and questionable business practices. Though not entirely illegal, the revelations cast serious doubts on his ethics. Regulators launched inquiries. The board forced him to temporarily step down as CEO, installing an interim figurehead to steer Donovan Capital until the dust settled. Marcus, once the unstoppable force in the world of high finance, found himself drowning in self-inflicted misery. He tried to see Henry when he could court-ordered visitation schedules. Sometimes he'd gaze at his son in the crib, marveling at how pure and untainted the child was by the swirling chaos. In those tender, wordless moments, he realized the depth of his miscalculation. He had gained the world in fleeting fame and fortune, but lost the loyalty of a good woman, the stability of a solid family, and the respect of those who once admired him. Eleanor, on the other hand, glowed with the fulfillment of someone who had found her path, albeit through heartbreak. She no longer carried the illusions of a fairy tale marriage. Instead, she stood firm on a foundation of self-worth, maternal devotion, and a dream that had become her own to shape. She was far from perfect. Late nights still brought sorrowful memories, and the weight of single parenthood was immense. But each step forward, every milestone in the green horizon, fun and every coo or giggle from Henry reminded her that she was not just surviving. She was thriving. In the end, the story of Marcus Donovan's baby moon betrayal was overshadowed by a far more compelling narrative. The remarkable resilience of Eleanor Donovan, the woman who refused to be a victim of circumstance. She had taken the shattered pieces of her marriage and transformed them into building blocks for a future she could proudly call her own. The empire that Marcus once claimed as his birthright was now reshaped by the very person he had betrayed, and the world applauded the justice in that reversal of fortune. In this whirlwind saga of infidelity, heartbreak, and karmic justice, we've witnessed how a man's towering ambitions and insatiable desires can unravel everything he cherishes. From the moment Marcus Donovan betrayed his pregnant wife to the day she claimed a defining stake in his empire, destiny proved that true power lies not in wealth, but in loyalty, trust, and resilience. Eleanor's journey, rising from the ashes of humiliation to build a life of purpose and success, reminds us that no betrayal is ever the final chapter, and redemption often favors the strong of heart.